Ixer, a being of immense power, had existed for millennia. It was not just a god but a creator, a giver of life to the alien species known as the Zelka. The Zelka worshipped it, hailed it as their divine protector, and under Ixer's guidance, they thrived. Their civilization expanded, spreading across the stars, claiming planets, building vast empires, all thanks to the wisdom and power Ixer had bestowed upon them. But over time, as Ixer's energy waned, so did the Zelka's loyalty. The Zelka had once been a primitive race, struggling to survive on a desolate world. Ixer had seen potential in them, elevating them from their humble beginnings. They were given knowledge, technology to shape their destiny. With Ixer's power behind them, they built ships, conquered space, and became a dominant force in the galaxy. They owed everything to their god. But the Zelka were not a species known for gratitude. As their empire grew, so did their arrogance. Ixer, as powerful as it had once been, began to weaken. The vast energy it had expended over millennia weighed heavily on its being. The cosmic forces of the universe were relentless, and even gods were not immune to time. The Zelka noticed. Their once invincible god, the source of their power and prosperity, was fading. Rather than assist or comfort their creator, they saw Ixer's decline as a threat. Gods, after all, were supposed to be eternal, invincible. If the galaxy discovered that their god was weakening, it would be seen as a weakness in the Zelka as well. Fear crept into the minds of the Zelka leadership. A dying god was not only useless to them but dangerous. They feared what would happen if their enemies found out that their protector was no longer omnipotent. Rather than risk their empire, they made a cold and calculated decision. Ixer had to be abandoned. The god, who had given them life, who had raised them from nothing, was now a liability. And so, Ixer was exiled. The Zelka, without a trace of remorse, transported their god to a barren, desolate planet on the fringes of the galaxy. There they left it, alone, without resources, without the reverence it had once commanded. A planet with no life, no means of escape, Ixer was left to wither away, to die in the cold, uncaring void of space. In the solitude of this barren world, Ixer felt the weight of its betrayal. The Zelka had been its children. It had given them everything, and in return, they had discarded it like refuse. Alone on that forsaken planet, Ixer could do little but reflect on the eons it had spent serving ungrateful beings. The once great god, now a shadow of its former self, sent a final plea into the cosmos. A simple, desperate message: help me. The message was not grand or commanding, as one might expect from a god. It was weak, almost pitiful. Ixer knew that most of the galaxy would ignore such a call. Why would they help a dying god, especially one associated with the powerful but now distant Zelka? The signal echoed through the stars, carried on faint, wavering energy. For a time, there was no response. And then, something unexpected happened. A small, unremarkable fleet of ships from a distant, relatively young species received the signal. The humans, a race not even considered major players in galactic politics, picked up the faint cry for help. Humanity was still relatively new to the broader galaxy. They were small, outnumbered, and often underestimated by the older, more established civilizations. But there was something in the message, something in the way it had been sent, that stirred something in them. Ixer, lying weakened on the barren planet, did not expect a response. It had resigned itself to a slow, agonizing death. But then, from the void of space, it felt a presence, small, insignificant compared to the mighty Zelka, but undeniably there. The humans had arrived. They were curious, cautious, but most of all, they were compassionate. The humans did not worship Ixer. They did not see it as a god. But they understood what it was like to be left behind, to be underestimated, to be pushed aside by stronger forces. Humanity had experienced its share of struggles, and that sense of empathy, that intrinsic need to stand up for those in need, even a god, was what drove them to act. When Commander Ava, the leader of the human fleet, first made contact with Ixer, she was struck by the being's vulnerability. This was not the almighty god she had imagined. Ixer was weak, its energy fading, its once glorious form now diminished. But Ava did not see weakness, she saw an ally in need of help. Ixer, too, was taken aback. These humans, so young in the grand scheme of the galaxy, were not there to conquer, not there to take advantage of its weakened state. They were there to save it. Commander Ava explained to Ixer that humanity did not abandon those in need. Whether god or mortal, if someone called for help, humans would answer. It was a concept Ixer had not fully understood before. It had always been revered, worshipped, or feared. It had never experienced such simple, genuine compassion from those it considered beneath it. The bond between the humans and Ixer was not one of worship but of mutual respect, something that had been missing from Ixer's relationship with the Zelka for a long time. The humans were no strangers to being the underdog. In a galaxy full of ancient civilizations, some with tens of thousands of years of history, humanity was barely a blip on the radar. They had only recently joined the interstellar stage, and even then, it was often with skepticism from others. Humanity was seen as reckless, primitive, and overly ambitious for their size. But what the galaxy didn't understand was that humanity had something many older species had long since forgotten: compassion. When Commander Ava and her crew received the faint signal from Ixer, they didn't hesitate to investigate. The message was weak, a whisper among the endless noise of space, but it was enough. The crew immediately set to work decoding the message, trying to understand where it had come from and, more importantly, who had sent it. When they realized it was coming from a god, a being as old as the stars themselves, there was hesitation, but not doubt. The galaxy had abandoned Ixer, left it to die, but the humans couldn't. To the galaxy at large, humanity was still new, still growing. Their reach wasn't as vast as the Zelka or other prominent empires, but they had spirit, a stubborn refusal to back down, even when faced with seemingly impossible odds. It was that spirit that drove Commander Ava and her crew to act. They knew full well that responding to the call of a god could stir up trouble, could put them on the wrong side of powerful forces. The Zelka would not take kindly to anyone interfering in their plans, especially not a species as young as humanity. But that didn't stop them. Commander Ava wasn't about to let fear dictate their actions. She gathered her officers, laying out the plan in no uncertain terms. The mission would be dangerous. They were heading deep into a region of space controlled by factions who might shoot them down on sight. They would be seen as meddlers, interfering in something far bigger than themselves. But Ava knew that none of that mattered if they could help a god who had been wronged, a god left to die by those who owed it everything. The crew was small, just a handful of ships compared to the vast fleets of the other galactic powers. Their technology, while advanced by human standards, was still considered rudimentary in the eyes of many. But what they lacked in numbers or sheer firepower, they made up for in determination. Humanity had never relied solely on strength to survive. They had always found ways to outthink, outmaneuver, and outlast their enemies. This mission would be no different. As they approached the desolate planet where Ixer had been exiled, the tension among the crew was palpable. They knew the risks. They were venturing into the heart of unknown territory, and the Zelka or other hostile forces could appear at any moment. But there was no turning back now. Humanity had made its choice, and they would see it through. The planet itself was a bleak, lifeless rock, orbiting a dying star on the far edges of the galaxy. It was a place no one visited, a place where hope had long since died. Yet, on this forsaken world, the humans found the weakened form of Ixer, the once mighty god who had been abandoned by the very species it had raised up. The moment of contact between Commander Ava and Ixer was surreal. Here stood a being of immense power, its presence alone enough to make the air crackle with energy, yet it was diminished, clearly suffering. For a moment, Ava hesitated. What could her small fleet of humans possibly offer a god? But then she remembered why they had come. Humanity wasn't here because they thought they could gain something from Ixer. They were here because it was the right thing to do. Ixer, though weak, could still sense the humans' intentions. Unlike the Zelka, who had viewed it as nothing more than a tool, the humans did not approach with expectations of power or divine favor. They came with sincerity, with a genuine desire to help. It was a feeling Ixer had not experienced in eons, humility from mortals. Commander Ava, standing before the god, made her intentions clear. Humanity had come to save Ixer, not for personal gain or out of reverence, but because they couldn't stand by while a sentient being, god or otherwise, was left to die. Ixer, too weak to speak directly, conveyed its thoughts through a faint telepathic link. It was surprised, shocked even, that such a young species would risk so much for it. The galaxy had moved on, the other civilizations no longer cared about Ixer's fate. Yet, here were these humans, willing to defy the odds and the larger powers to save it. For the first time in millennia, Ixer felt something it had long thought lost: hope. The Zelka had turned their backs, abandoned their creator, but the humans, these small, resilient beings, were willing to act out of sheer compassion. Ixer realized that perhaps it had been looking at the galaxy all wrong. Power wasn't just in control and dominance. It could also be found in the smallest acts of kindness, in the courage to do what was right even when no one else would. Ava and her crew worked quickly. They knew time was against them. They needed to get Ixer off the planet before anyone noticed. The extraction process was delicate. Ixer's energy reserves were dangerously low, and the stress of moving it could be fatal. But the humans were nothing if not resourceful. Using every bit of technology and skill they had, they managed to stabilize Ixer, preparing it for transport. As they made their way back to their ships, there was a growing sense of urgency. The galaxy was a vast, dangerous place, and they had just interfered in matters far beyond their usual scope. The Zelka would undoubtedly be furious if they discovered what had happened. But Ava wasn't concerned with the politics of it all. Her focus was on the mission: save Ixer, get her crew home safely, and deal with the consequences later. As they lifted off the surface of the barren world, Ixer, though still weak, reached out once more to Commander Ava. In a faint, almost ethereal voice, it thanked her. Not as a god speaking to a worshipper, but as one being to another. Ixer, for the first time in its long existence, felt truly connected to those who had come to its aid. The humans knew their mission was far from over. Getting Ixer off the planet was only the beginning. As Commander Ava's fleet set course for the nearest safe system, the weight of what they had done began to settle in. They had interfered with a being that was once revered across the galaxy, and now they were bound to face the consequences. The Zelka and other empires would not let this rescue go unnoticed. They would come for Ixer, and by extension, they would come for humanity. The ship's sensors picked up movement at the edge of the system. Multiple signals. It wasn't long before the human crew realized they were not alone. A fleet, far larger than their own, was closing in fast. The Zelka had arrived, along with several other species that had once benefited from Ixer's rule. They were all here for the same reason: to ensure Ixer's fate remained unchanged. The humans had dared to defy an unspoken agreement among the galaxy's elites: no one would interfere with the god's exile. Ava and her crew were outnumbered, outgunned, but they had prepared for this. They had known from the moment they received Ixer's signal that this mission would not be simple. Even before launching the rescue, they had anticipated that their actions would draw the attention of far more powerful forces. The question was never whether they would face opposition, but whether they could survive it. Ava gathered her officers for a final strategy discussion. The Zelka ships were faster, equipped with more advanced weaponry, but humanity's strength had never been in brute force. Humanity's resilience, their ability to adapt, to think on their feet, that's what had gotten them this far. And it would have to be enough now. Ava laid out the plan. They would use their smaller ship's agility to outmaneuver the Zelka, employing guerrilla tactics to buy time. Every human crew member knew what was at stake. This wasn't just about Ixer anymore. This was about showing the galaxy that humanity wasn't a species to be underestimated or ignored. The first shots were fired. The Zelka, arrogant and confident in their superior firepower, advanced without hesitation, assuming that the humans would fold under the sheer weight of their assault. But Ava and her crew were ready. They had spent years preparing for the inevitable conflicts that would arise from humanity's rise in the galaxy, and they had learned from every encounter. The human fleet split, breaking into smaller groups that darted around the massive Zelka ships, hitting weak points and then retreating before the enemy could react. It wasn't about winning outright. it was about survival. The battle intensified. The Zelka, realizing the humans were not as easy to crush as they had expected, adjusted their tactics, becoming more aggressive. Ships exploded on both sides. The vacuum of space filled with the debris of the conflict. Despite the odds, the humans fought with a ferocity that took their enemies by surprise. Every time the Zelka thought they had trapped the human ships, they would slip away, regroup, and strike again. In the midst of the chaos, Ixer, still weak but growing stronger with each passing moment, watched from the human command ship. It could feel the determination of these beings who had come to its aid. They were not fighting for worship or divine favor, they were fighting for survival, for something far deeper than reverence. Ixer, once feared and revered as an untouchable god, now understood something it had never grasped in its millennia of existence: the strength of those who fought not out of obligation, but out of choice. And then, in a moment of clarity, Ixer realized it still had power left to give. Not much, but enough. Enough to tip the scales. It reached out to Commander Ava, its voice echoing faintly in her mind. Ixer offered the humans what little energy it could muster, a gift not of divine intervention, but of partnership. Ava, understanding the gravity of the situation, accepted. The Zelka had never seen Ixer as anything more than a tool, something to be used and discarded when it no longer served them. But humanity had seen Ixer as something more, and now the god would repay that recognition. The change was immediate. Human shields, once barely holding against the Zelka's relentless assault, grew stronger. The ships, which had been pushed to their limits, suddenly found new reserves of energy. The tide of the battle shifted, not dramatically, but just enough to give the humans an edge. They pressed their advantage, using Ixer's energy to reinforce their tactics, exploiting the openings they had created earlier in the fight. The Zelka, realizing too late that they were no longer in control, faltered. Their arrogance had blinded them to the possibility that humans could pose a real threat, and now they were paying the price. One by one, their ships began to fall back, retreating from the battlefield. The other alien species that had joined the assault followed suit. They had not come here for a prolonged war, they had come to ensure that Ixer remained forgotten, and now they realized that wasn't going to happen. As the battle drew to a close, Ava's fleet stood victorious, though not without cost. Several human ships had been lost, and the damage to the survivors was significant. But they had succeeded. They had saved Ixer, and more importantly, they had shown the galaxy that humanity was a force to be reckoned with. Ixer, watching the Zelka retreat, felt a sense of closure. The species it had once raised from the dust had betrayed it, but in the end, it was the humans, a species that had no reason to care, who had come to its rescue. As the humans began their journey back to safer space, Ixer made a silent vow. It would never forget this act of kindness. Humanity had not only saved its life, but they had also shown it a new way to exist. Ixer, the once great god, had found something more valuable than power, an ally in the most unexpected of places. As the human fleet limped away from the battlefield, the adrenaline of victory slowly faded, giving way to the realization of what they had just accomplished. They had defied the will of not only the Zelka but also several other galactic powers, and for the first time, they had done so in a way that would not go unnoticed. There was no doubt that news of this battle would spread quickly, and with it, the galaxy's perception of humanity would change. The underdogs had risen up, and they had done so by allying themselves with a god. Ixer, still recovering but far more stable now, was aboard one of the human ships. It had regained some of its strength thanks to the humans' intervention, but the true source of its renewal was not merely the humans' technology, or their willingness to fight for it. It was something deeper, something Ixer had never truly understood before. The humans had acted not out of obligation, not because they needed Ixer, but because they believed it was the right thing to do. It was a concept foreign to the ancient god, whose experience had always been with species that sought power and domination. But with humanity, it was different. Their compassion and resilience were what had saved Ixer, and in turn, they had changed it. Back on Earth and in human colonies across the galaxy, the news of the rescue spread like wildfire. For a species that had always been seen as the galaxy's youngest, smallest player, this was a defining moment. They had not only survived an encounter with far superior forces, but they had also gained a powerful ally in Ixer. The public, for the most part, celebrated the success of Commander Ava and her fleet. There was a newfound sense of pride, a feeling that humanity had finally stepped into the larger galactic arena and proven that they could hold their own. However, not everyone saw it that way. Within the human leadership, there was concern. The rescue of Ixer had made humanity a target. The Zelka, humiliated and furious over the loss, would not forget this. Neither would the other species that had joined the attack. There were whispers of retaliation, of alliances forming in the shadows to deal with this human problem, before it grew any larger. Humanity had thrown itself into the galactic spotlight, and there were consequences that came with that. Commander Ava, now hailed as a hero by her people, was summoned to discuss the future. She had known from the beginning that saving Ixer would have far-reaching implications, but standing in the aftermath, she fully grasped the scale of what they had done. The humans had crossed the line. No longer would they be able to quietly build their colonies and explore the stars. They had taken a stand, and now they would be watched closely by those who feared what their next move might be. Ixer, watching from the sidelines, understood this as well. The god had seen the patterns of power shift and change over millennia, and it knew what was coming. The galaxy's balance had been disrupted, and humanity would face challenges unlike any it had encountered before. But Ixer was not merely an observer in this new chapter. It had made a silent pact with humanity the moment they had rescued it. The god was no longer content to remain passive or aloof. Humanity had given Ixer a new purpose, a new reason to exist, and now Ixer was determined to protect them. The Zelka, as expected, did not take their defeat lightly. In the days following the battle, they issued a formal declaration to the galaxy. They labeled humanity as a rogue species, accusing them of meddling in affairs far beyond their station. The Zelka called for sanctions, for isolation, for any means to contain what they saw as a growing threat. Other species, fearful of Ixer's return and wary of humanity's newfound confidence, were quick to fall in line. The alliances that had formed in the shadows during the battle began to solidify, and soon, humanity found itself facing a coalition of powers far larger than anything they could have imagined. But humanity was not alone. Ixer, despite its weakened state, began to share its knowledge with the humans. Ancient technologies, long forgotten by the galaxy, were revealed. Ixer taught them how to harness energy in ways that no other species had ever considered, ways that could turn the tide in the face of overwhelming opposition. Humanity, once seen as backward and primitive, was now on the brink of a technological revolution, thanks to Ixer's guidance. As the threat of war loomed, humanity and Ixer grew closer. The god no longer saw itself as a distant figure to be worshipped or feared. It had come to respect the humans, to see them as equals in their own way. Their strength did not come from power or technology, but from their ability to persevere, to care for one another, and to stand up for what they believed was right. This connection, this shared purpose, was something Ixer had never experienced before. It was no longer alone. The galaxy watched with bated breath as the situation escalated. The Zelka, frustrated by their inability to subdue humanity through political pressure, began preparing for an all-out assault. Their fleets grew larger by the day, and their allies joined in, readying themselves for a decisive strike. But humanity, bolstered by Ixer's knowledge and their own determination, did not waver. As tensions reached their peak, Ixer made a declaration of its own. It stood before the galaxy, not as a god demanding reverence, but as a being who had chosen to fight alongside humanity. Ixer's message was clear: it had been abandoned once, but it would not be abandoned again. Humanity had saved it, and now it would do everything in its power to protect them in return. The galaxy, stunned by Ixer's open support for humanity, hesitated. The Zelka, once certain of their victory, now found themselves facing not only a resurgent humanity but a god who had sworn to stand by their side. The balance of power had shifted once more, and the outcome of the impending conflict was far from certain. In the end, the rescue of Ixer had done more than just save a god. It had forged a bond between humanity and Ixer that would reshape the galaxy. Whether it led to war or peace, one thing was clear: humanity, once the galaxy's underdog, was now a force to be reckoned with, and Ixer would be with them every step of the way.